Okay, so one of our more common rational functions is what we call the reciprocal function. And the reciprocal function says this. It says f of x equals 1 over x. Okay, so let's think about that just a little bit. And we're going to make a little graph over here. Now, sometimes in this section we're going to graph things, but I didn't provide grids because they were kind of bulky and in the way and just because of things that we're doing. Okay, so it's about making a table of values, x, f of x, right? So if you put in 0, well, that's a problem, right? Because you'd have 1 over 0, and that's undefined. Okay, so x cannot be 0. It's not in the domain. We know that, right? You can see that. So the domain is negative infinity to 0, and then 0 to infinity. You can have all those numbers, but you can't have 0. When that happens, we're creating what's called a vertical asymptote, which we're going to talk about those more later, but I'm going to go ahead and draw it in. So it's a dotted line for an asymptote like that. Okay. So just put that in for now. Okay, but you could have 1. 1 over 1 is 1, and that's a point on the graph. So let's make the point 1, 1. We know that's part of the graph. Okay. Now let's just think about positive values. Let's think about this part of the domain. What happens if I put in 2? Well, then don't I get 1/2? So that would be like 2, 1/2. What happens if I put in like 10? That would be like 1/10, right? So it would be way out down here like a 10, but it'd be just a little bit above. So you see that it's graphing, whoops, okay, maybe I need the grids. I can't draw these. It's going toward the x-axis, right? It's never going to be negative if you keep putting in positive numbers. It's going to be positive. Then we have notation that goes with this. We say as x is getting larger, as x is approaching infinity, f of x is approaching 0. Okay, so hopefully you can see that it's going like this. The function's going, it starts out at 1, and as the numbers get larger, it's getting closer and closer to 0. Okay, now what happens about the numbers in between 0 and 1? Like right in here, what's happening? So what happens if you put in, here's my table of values continuing. What happens if I put in something like 1/2? Well, then don't I have 1 over 1/2? Which is 1 times 2 over 1, multiply by the reciprocal, and I get 2. Okay, so that number would be 1/2, 2. It'd be like up here. What happens if I put in 1/10? Well, that'd be 1 over 1/10, which is going to be 1 times 10 over 1, which would be 10. So it'd be a very big number. I shouldn't put in 10 because it doesn't really fit, but it's going to be like way up here. And it's just a little bit to the right of that dotted red line, okay? So we see it going up this way. We say let's see, where can I write it? As x approaches 0 from the right-hand side. So from the positive side, we're going from the positive side and it's approaching 0, so it's going this way. As x is getting closer and closer to 0, f of x is approaching infinity. Okay? So that's kind of what it looks like. I didn't draw it very well, but that's what the function looks like. And we have this special notation here that tells us things. And in this case, for that part of the graph, it says x is approaching 0. If x is approaching 0 from the right-hand side, that's what that little superscript means, that little plus. It means from the right. Okay, so meaning the right-hand side. So we're approaching 0 this way. Okay, as x is approaching 0 from the right, f of x is going toward infinity. Okay, now what happens if we're on the other side? What if we're talking about the negative numbers? Well, think about putting in a -1. Wouldn't you get 1 over -1, which would be -1? So that's going to be -1, -1. It's going to be right here. And as I put in like a negative, I don't know, 3, you would get -1/3. So think about -3. It's going to be like just a little bit under. And so we're going this way and we're approaching the x-axis again. So as x approaches -infinity, f of x is approaching 0. Okay? What happens if I put in a number like -1/2? Can't run out of room here. Say I put in -1/2. Well, then wouldn't I get 1 over -1/2, which is going to be 1 times -2 over 1, and that's going to be -2. So I'm going to get -1, 2. It's going to be down here. And if I were to put in like negative, I don't know, -1/3, I would get -3. So as I'm getting closer to 0 going this way, so as my x value is getting closer and closer to 0 that way, my numbers are getting really small. They're going toward -infinity. So for this part of the curve, we would say as x approaches 0 from the left-hand side. That superscript is like a little minus sign. It's not an exponent or anything. It's just a superscript telling you which way you're going on the x-axis. You're going towards 0 from the left. So this way. As x approaches 0 from the left of x approaches -infinity, right? Because this is going off toward -infinity. Okay, that's what the graph of the reciprocal function looks like. Okay. So, and pretty much I covered the arrow notation. Okay, so we can think about this graph one more time just to go over the, this is a very rough sketch of that reciprocal function. That doesn't even look good. It should be symmetric about the origin, but anyway, I just want to go over the arrow notation. So, let's do the positive side first. As x approaches 0 from the right-hand side, so as we're going this way, then f of x is approaching infinity. Now, as we're going this way, as x approaches infinity, positive infinity, f of x is approaching 0. Okay, now we're going to do this side. So as x approaches 0 from the left, as x approaches 0 from the left, f of x is approaching -infinity, right? Because it's going off this way, down -infinity. Okay. And as we go this way, oops, one more, as x approaches -infinity, f of x approaches 0. Now you might be saying, well, does it make a difference if I'm approaching 0 from the top or the bottom? No, they're both just approaching 0. So that's how we write it. So this is the arrow notation. It's in the book also. I've gone through it twice, so I'm hoping that, no, it's new probably for you, so it's a little bit of explanation there. And one of the things is those little superscripts, the little plus coming from the right, and the little minus superscript means we're coming from the left. Okay? Right, we'll work more with some arrow notation, but we don't do a lot of it, but it's good to know, and you can, use it in other classes as well.